Cryptozoology show with your host, the cryptozoologist. And this episode, a love story, but you'll have that at the end. Updates of books, same thing. I can't go into them now because it's too heartbreaking, so I want this to be a more sort of entertaining sort of show at first. So if you don't want to hear the sappy part at the end or about the books and stuff, then at least you'll get some updated information. We're going to cover some pretty interesting sort of things here. Little known cryptids, a water dragon, and sorry, as usual, irritating windows to annoy the heck out of you with something. Boy, I'll tell you, that's quite the gang. Anyway, I'm going to do a show about that one of these days. But anyways, updates about the Bigfoot sort of thing. There were some things that I missed. The Tombstone Epitaph photo and some other flying creeps. We'll talk about them a little bit. And, some other sort of angels, as I said, and our lake monsters in our world in trouble with all these sorts of pollutions, and a little bit of other sort of tidbits and things like that. And on the next show, I'll be covering sort of the Buru and some unusual sort of werewolves, unicorn updates, and some other unusual topics too. So anyways, we'll continue on for now about some of these sort of interesting sort of topics, and especially if you've been looking for the Tombstone Epitaph photo, I may actually have it here. This is, for some reason, this photo, I could have sworn I've seen it before a long time ago somewhere too, and this is why I always thought that I saw this Tombstone Epitaph photo, because this, I have an eidetic memory with pictures, and I could have sworn I've seen something almost identical to this a long time ago in some kind of Fortune magazine or something somewhere, right? So anyways, but we'll cover that and some other sort of fascinating topics, and especially the angels ones is interesting. It's a bit more sappy and lovey and all that sort of stuff, but it is interesting because I interviewed a Muslim family that saw an angel, and I watched this film and stuff. It's the most fascinating thing in the universe. I cover it in one of the other shows where you can see the whole thing. But there's butterfly people we're going to be talking about, and some other weird things that I've seen that is very, very convincing, that is not easily explained with a simple answer here and sort of thing like that, and they're not CGI things. So this is interesting, like in this sort of aspect, right? So, but anyways, we'll continue on here, and I wanted to first talk though about the Bigfoot sort of things. And here's the one of the guys that I was talking about, a wild sort of ape man that lived up in the trees in Morocco. Now look at this dude. Now this is my sort of belief, and this is what I'm saying. Could you imagine that a guy like this was reported to be the child of some kind of caveman guy that sort of raped some local lady there, and then this guy ended up, and in this case he was very vegetarian-like. He would hang upside down and look at his long, extreme simian arms, much more than typical humans have, right? And long legs and stuff like this. Also, interestingly, look at his sort of mouth, how it's lower, like a Sasquatch is always reported. And this sort of weirder, bigger sort of jaw here. Look at the gigantic broad nose on him and a bit more of a cranium. Could you imagine a group of him, let's say a similar like thing? This is in modern times. This guy was alive not that many massive decades ago, right? So this is just one of them. The other one didn't turn out as furry, but the same thing, and we'll cover him in a second. So this is absolutely sort of proving that these Bigfoot-like sort of guy has existed out in our even modern times that we can identify. So you're telling me, and this is the thing, and I wanted to mention something else. This is fascinating. There was this tribe up around where the Wahila lives is reported, and things like this, and up through the Fraser Valley and all that. But there's other sort of ones exactly like this in the Antarctic and Arctic and Northwest Territories and Alaska, where you get the same sort of reports, right? So this, and they could be actually relics, sort of dire wolves of some sort. But I covered that a little bit in another sort of thing. But also around in this sort of region, they had these stories way back ages ago about that there was these tribes of sort of hairy sort of monster guys that lived in caves and this kinds of things, and they were really wild, and they sort of even believed back then that this is interesting, that they were people originally that were thrown out of tribes and thrown out of sort of village like sort of things, and was forced to live out like that, and they started becoming more gruesome and hairy and things. They're saying this massive ages ago, and I believe this, but I never heard this sort of where people this long ago actually believed such a thing, but it follows exactly what one of my beliefs is that some of these are by this sort of thing that we're seeing. Not all of them. Like I agree, there could be a Gigantopithecus sort of thing out there, as well as a few other sort of great apes that have eluded us. However, this is definitely responsible for quite a few of these sort of things that has been seen, and this then makes it sort of very feasible. And now get a load of this, like here's like the scientific sort of community, if this guy didn't exist in these more modern times, if they had found this guy sort of buried by the flood or whatever and stuff like this, they would have claimed that he was our ancient relative sort of ape man, and that he was, Gigantopithecus Bunyan Wunyan, and they would have given him some ridiculous scientific name. Even the first guy, like some of those early ones that we supposedly evolved from and stuff, they proved later was just an older person with arthritis and stuff. I mean, a lot of this stuff is complete hogwash show, right? Like anybody from ancient times to today can get these kinds of things because we've always sort of had them in us, and it probably wild humans thrown out of villages, thrown out of native tribes, any kind of thing where the guy looks weird or something, some kind of thing. All you need is a few of these, and then they mate, and maybe some of this stuff carries on, and they start becoming sort of more weird and wild, sort of like, and they hide from us. And definitely these people exist. I mean, here's one of them right in front of you. All right. Look at this dude. I mean, look, you can see all this sort of fascinating hair all over his face, and there's sort of like, and he's got the Bigfootish sort of crownish sort of head to him, and the creepy sort of longer, much longer arms and legs as sort of thing. So, I mean, absolutely fascinating, right? Now here's the opposite version there where this guy, I believe the Silken gang got their hands on him, but maybe not. Maybe actually just where he inherited instead the hairy part, he got sort of more the typical Asian sort of part. But I mean, this guy would be a monster in sort of like the Asian world, right? Could you imagine him walking down the street and sort of stuff? But you see his big, long, simian arms and the same sort of thing. He's got a long sort of more face. His head's a bit more cranium-like and this sort of thing. So can you imagine this? He's a skinnier version because it's of the Asian sort of culture. Most of them are sort of lighter weight on average. Not all, of course, but I mean, just an average is there. So this guy's sort of like, this is why this sort of gene part sort of came out more. But she said that a Uran came down and sort of raped her, right? And look at, I mean, so these are actual real monster sort of characters that live in sort of caves or trees and go ooh, 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 and this sort of idea. One's the typical Bigfootish looking. This guy happened to inherit the other parts, but many things are the same here. And so this is very sort of feasible that there is wild people that have always lived amongst us that sort of after time doesn't probably take massively long. Once you get a few of them going in a region, then there would be maybe more of them as they go along. It's not really as hard as, but I mean, no matter what, and the same thing, there's a lot of scientists out there saying this and that, we don't have a skeleton. Like I said, here you could have a skeleton, one right there if you want, sort of thing, because if that guy was furry and he was walking through the woods, you would believe he's a Bigfoot. And this is the thing. This is what I'm saying. These guys have big white feet, sort of just like a Sasquatch would, and this sort of thing. And it's very feasible that at least a portion of the sightings out there are caused by this sort of thing. Not a guy like him, of course, but sort of thing. But if he was furry, then certainly he would be able to do that. But the previous fellow, it guaranteed, you know what I mean? That's something that would sort of do that, right? So that's interesting. Now, here's, like, look at this. I found this old article here. I hadn't seen this one before. I thought I saw those in a book, but it was small, though, or something. But I don't remember. It was many years ago that wherever I saw this someplace, it was on something. It might have been one of John Green's things or one of those, you know. But nevertheless, see, are these the last cavemen, right? British Columbia sort of thing like this. So and now get a load of this. Now see this here. This is what I wanted to talk about in modern times. Boy, am I suspicious of this sort of thing. When I was a kid, I investigated and interviewed all kinds of people over all these decades of every time, from even people that have seen them in Eagle Lake and different sort of stuff. I met a native guy rowing on a canoe that told me that he saw a Sasquatch around there, and also a kid that was camping that was a friend of a close lady friend of mine, sort of a thing, and all kinds of different sort of people that I investigated. And none of these people, except historic records that I could find of just small amounts of examples, would talk about any rock throwing or stick knocking and all this sort of stuff. But then all of a sudden in these more modern times, you get these guys that have started putting out all these sorts of shows and stuff like this, and almost three-quarters of the stories now I'm getting on the internet of new sightings and stuff is somebody where the guy where it's whistling now, it's shooting rocks, it's banging sticks, and that they're doing all this sort of stuff. I'm highly suspect of this now because this was not reported in most of them. Yes, these creatures have always been known to do this, and I've always known that they do this. I read about Ape Canyon and all them when I was a young kid and all that sort of thing, but it just, a vast majority of sightings were not like this. And they didn't mention these much, just little bits and that, and it certainly wasn't known to the general public sort of thing. When I was a kid doing Sasquatch sort of research or I'd do a project in class, I was looked upon as some kind of wild sort of guy from outer space here, that how could he believe in Bigfoot? And then they'd be listening to the stuff, and I'd show them all these different things about it that make it improbable likely that there isn't such a creature because of all these sorts of weird sort of things like this. And this was one of the things that I believed it could be prehistoric sort of man that somehow is sort of, you know, lives in cave systems and things like that. That's responsible for at least some of them. But this rock throwing thing now, this is where I have problems now. I mean, there's people, they're taking casts of old tracks that were authentic, and they're rubberizing them and using stilts on them and all these kinds of stuff. So it's getting more and more difficult to tell real from not real anymore. And if you, as we mentioned in some of these other shows about UFO and gods and God and this sort of thing, that they mention in the end times that the whole world will see it once, sort of thing like that. That's only possible now through internet. These sort of, like, there's all these sort of things that sort of fit into where people won't believe anything that they see anymore. That's because of this sort of thing. You get all these sort of fraudulent sort of people, or people that want to get, everybody wants to get into Bigfoot, which I'm glad at least they're doing something, going out in the wilderness and stuff. But there's a lot of things that I believe people do wrong. This leaving apples, kumbayaing and singing all around and all this sort of stuff, hammer knocking, yelling, all these sorts of things. This is why you're not getting authentic things on film almost never, right? What's really, these things are all just sort of a waste of time here. What it is, if this is a human or a great ape or both that we're dealing with here in this sort of North American region, we'll just talk about here, is that the problem is people put up these ridiculous sort of, still sort of photo trapped cameras, But they always seemingly have them where all you see is an arm come by or a part of the Bigfoot's face or this kinds of stuff. If you're going to do these things, if you can afford to go out and get one of these, you can probably buy 3 or 4 of these things. What people need to start doing is stop hanging out in these places. You need to leave the cameras there for much, much longer periods of time. You need to have them run by some kind of solar that so they can send you sort of pictures every so many often and sort of recycle it. There's cameras that are available that can do this. They might be a bit more expensive, but I mean, if you're going to go through all this trouble, if you got the cash, do it correctly, right? And this sort of thing. And it took years for them to get a first Sinai leopard on film. Years. Okay? Like, I mean, so it's not as easy as one would think, because you have to remember there can't be 10 million of them. Most people are, more than half of them are probably, especially in modern eras, are just wanting to get into the Bigfoot theme but really haven't really seen one. Okay, so guaranteed of this. But, so there's way less of them than what's claimed. And also there's 10 zillion acres of forest per each one of them floating around. So the odds of you being in the same spot as them at any one time is extremely low. It's if it's a wild human, they're going to hide from you, right? And the same thing with the great ape and stuff. They just discovered recently a just new kind of orangutan. He's a great big ape. He's not much, and he's smaller than a typical small, sort of short European people in some areas, right? So, I mean, he evaded us until just right now, 2020, right? I mean, now it's 2021, but I mean, this is, but I mean, he evaded us until all this time, right? So, and as I mentioned on the 7-hour show of Bigfoot there, that I show the great ape that was filmed in Russia. That's guaranteed about that. Oh, speaking of that, I was fascinated. I'm going to have to watch his old show, but I like this researcher, Josh Gates. I've never disagreed with him much about almost sort of similar sort of viewpoints and a lot of sort of things like this. But boy, do I disagree that he is writing off of the Dyatlov Pass, saying that it was not a mink. That is not sort of completely the opposite. I mean, I don't see how any human being can discount in bolts authentic sort of, they were not tampered with anything. You got real photos, the last year photos of a bunch of people. They take this Bigfoot looking thing. So there was a Bigfoot looking thing out in this forest at one point around them, right? You have giant footprints. You have damage that couldn't be caused by sort of any sort of thing like this. And when some of these guys are saying now it could be an avalanche and stuff, come on. I mean, the person's tongue was ripped out. Let's get real here. That's why the government lied about it. These guys knew about the investigation. They already were up there. That's why they found that KGB thing. I believe, me personally, that they found out very quickly. They might have even been able to hunt this thing down, and they might have killed it and have studied it since. Or B, that they sort of, whatever, right? Like maybe they saw it going in a mountain, decided to blow the mountain up, as far as I know. Like whatever what they did something to get rid of this problem, and they've refused until just recently now. They're stating they'll do it again, open it up at the case officially. But the thing is it's not going to go anywhere, whether they'll claim this or that or stuff like this, because they don't want to admit such a thing could exist. And it's sort of for 5 zillion reasons, right? So that I'm extremely suspect of that sort of thing. But how people could sort of eliminate that as a plausibility is absolutely, I don't get it. How you could ignore many sort of interesting things about it. I guarantee you people are not cutting holes in their tents from the inside and making holes so they can escape, right, for no reason. I mean, it makes 100% sense. Think about it. You're locked inside this thing. Maybe the day before they actually saw this thing when they were out, or they took it just before they started running out of the tent. I'm not sure. It's hard to know, right? But whatever the case, let's say that they did something like this. they would have shot in the sort of the camera. The kid writes the snowman lives, and bingo. I mean, really, it sort of much more adds up that way than any of these other sort of feasibilities that it was a rocket nuclear test or the Martians did it. I mean, come on, seriously. So, anyways, I will disagree with them this one time about that sort of thing, but I'd still, I would love to sort of, I think, a duende hunter or something like that, he'd be awesome to sort of go on a sort of expedition with and sort of that sort of thing, like, because maybe if you got the right people, just we all got different sort of mentalities, right? Like a slightly different, where each person's might think of something that the other one wouldn't have, and maybe all together you get enough luck here to sort of, because I guarantee you the mighty Ibu Go-Go exists. Right? I mean, they find the skeletons there still on the sort of island, and like I explained to you before, just because you find in a cave and you're claiming they died out 10,000 years ago, when the natives there all tell you they used to sort of have fights with them and things like this and all this kinds of stuff, they still claim to see them, okay? And the same thing has happened all the time, where the guys claim this creature is extinct for 500,000 years or 250,000 years or whatever, and then 5 minutes later he finds them alive right beside the place, or in the same cave even. So, I mean, these things are not sort of like standard enough that you can take them as the worldly Bible that this is the way it's got to be, right? So I'm very sort of why people are so against this. I think just everybody still wants to see how the Almas, the Yeti, the mink, and all of them as this big furry fuzzy guy that we can sort of give a hug to, right? And that sort of thing. So, but the reality is, if it is a primitive human, some humans are nice, some aren't, right? So, but anyways, so I will disagree about that sort of thing with that. Why, I know every other researcher, they seem to always want to go with some other sort of route here, but I don't see how you could eliminate that one. I really don't. I mean, it sort of mind boggles me how you can sort of deny these photographs are there. Giant footprints were found that are pretty weird looking. And I mean, why would sort of this KGB sort of hush this all up? But they would for something like that. Think about it, right? So I can see right away, some Russian scientists, you can't be telling them, the guy be going on and on about like sort of like, I could see how quickly that they wouldn't want the sort of any people to know of such a things exist out there, right? So they might sort of do something like that, or they knew that this was what did it, but they decided to hide it anyways. Maybe they weren't able to catch it, or who knows, but they have been killed by them before, reported in their armies and things like that, right? So that's just another thing. So I don't agree with that. I personally will always believe 100% that that's what sort of killed them, was a giant Alma. And a real monster too, because 20-inch sort of prints, that's pretty huge. There has been some, though, even 30 inches long, that's been reported up in those regions. Can you imagine? That'd be terrifying. But quite a few that were, at a certain sort of like 18-inch range and stuff like that. A lot of the reports are 8, 9, 10 feet tall in this sort of range. So this dude or dudette must have been quite the monster, anyways. And those Russian trees are pretty big, and even though it's an old grainy camera, I don't see why anybody would put the snowman lips for no reason. Why you would cut your whole, like, it makes no sense at all. None of the other ones. So why he eliminates that, or anybody else would, is a plausibility. I'm not going to agree with that. but all the rest, though, pretty well sort of most of the things certainly, and I hope that he finds lots of more treasures and as many mystery animals as possible. It'd be nice if he get lucky and actually catch a few. That's what we need. We need more sort of catching of these sort of things, right? But instead of, we're not, it's rare that people can catch these things, right? These mystery animals are quite difficult. But here's like a new, interesting sort of one here. This one was reported for ages and not believed in, thought to be a myth and stuff like this. But this Kulakamba, right? And here's a proven one right here. He says, so I mean, he's a fascinating sort of ape. But they believe that he's some kind of cross with sort of like a orangutan and a chimpanzee, eh? But look at him though; he's fascinating sort of eyes and stuff like that. And I read some old reports about them and stuff like that. And then there was actually a few in different sort of zoos here in the United States that wasn't known for some reason by other people and that sort of thing. So, but fascinating creature, eh? Isn't he really cool? So, I mean, if he could exist, I mean, really, is that any different from a Bigfoot-looking thing? I mean, really, like, you know, we're all getting stuck in this Gigantopithecus argument, wild human. I mean, Peter Burns, like me, where he believes at least there's some kind of human, a certain portion of them anyways, right? And people like that, there was a lot of them that sort of think like this too. But I also agree with these sort of hard red core bazooka Bigfoot gang that yes, there's some giant monkey men out there too that maybe are not human, right? There's some kind of Gigantopithecus or some kind of great ape of some sort, right? And I mean, this is he's a fascinating one right in front of us, right? And almost none of these have ever been seen, right? So a fascinating creature. But now next here, I'm going to go on with a real sea serpent. Now this is a I wanted to put this on my other sort of show with the dragons and stuff, and I couldn't find the damn thing, and here I finally got it again. But this is, to me, the greatest proof of a living dinosaur besides the Tucalata that's ever of all the sea carcasses. I guarantee you this was not a whale. This was not any known sort of creature on this planet. It does kind of match a mosasaurus-like sort of a thing, and we'll see that. And I want to cover how gigantic this creature is. We're going to go inch by inch to tell you from the original Newfoundland sort of paper, okay? This is from the 1880s. This was taken. In the original paper, it actually had to be spread on two sort of the papers, like, so the paper was, you know, you got your left and right hand side. The picture covered both sides of it. Okay, and this guy actually had to go way back to actually get this whole creature in. Now, just look at all these people here, and look at now. I know a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, that's great, you can like this." Okay, you can see this creature is not rotted enough yet. It's sad I can't find some of the ones that I messed with, but I'll put them up eventually. And I was able to sort of drag out some things on it that you're not seeing in these. That is absolutely fascinating, where you can clearly see that they are like some kind of dragon-like scales. Now, if you look in here, you can see this perfect sort of symmetry, every sort of blobs. Like they're all identical, okay? They're not sort of, it's not a whale rotting with fibers coming up or any of this BS. This is sort of, the creature isn't that rotted yet, okay? And this is cold freezing water here and this sort of thing. And he's perfect symmetry all the way through. He hasn't lost his skin yet. It's not a whale. This dude, depending on where you heard the information from, was at least like as long as the biggest known blue whale ever in history sort of thing, but much longer, really likely, okay, by a fair amount. And so bottom line is there's no whale on Earth or any known creature that is this sort of length and size. Nothing looks like this at all, and we're going to go through each part of them here, and you're actually going to see a real sea serpent. I mean, a real one here, and this is like, I will argue with any ichthyologist on this planet or marine biologist. I will box with you day and night. You put any of your fake stuff that you're going to claim it was, you know, this whale or that or whatever. I'm going to just prove you wrong very quickly. I mean, come on, don't be ridiculous. I don't want to hear from some skeptic saying that it was a seal or something, because you don't know what you're talking about. And this is a real sort of thing here, not something you can explain by any of the sort of known marine sort of animals we have, except like one that would be dinosaurian. And since a coelacanth could survive the dinosaur period, so could some other ones. And this dude did, at least up until the 1800s. Okay, so let's keep going through them here. So look at all these people, and I cut them every sort of spot where then I can add them on to the next one here, okay? So now here's you saw where that guy is there, and now he's going there. And you can see these sort of pores here. They're all identical, and they're bump ridges, scale-like sort of dragon-like sort of scales, okay? Now, you can clearly see here, here's that where that character was with the stripes and stuff. So now here's a whole more gang of people and it's gone along, right? Okay, and sort of thing. It's not called Kulakam by accident. That was still left in there. I'll try and remove that if I can or something. Okay, and so now here's now from that sort of gang, and now we're down to here. Now look at this thing. You can actually still see a part of his eyeball in there, so it's not even, wasn't even eaten fully away yet, okay? Look at the teeth serration on this dude, okay? And look at the beak on him. He's not a whale. There's no blowhole whatsoever. When there's, now it's sad on this one, but there's a few other sort of ones that I was able to sort of get, and there's fins that come out on the side around here, okay, that are sort of uniform. You see another one down and they're exactly the same, so they weren't even wadded yet, sort of enough to sort of thing like this. But his head got it more because something, I guess, maybe while he was floating or whatever, maybe birds or something, whatever, different part, or maybe his face has less sort of armor in some parts or something. I'm not really sure, but whatever the case may be, he's certainly not a whale. There's no known sort of animal on this planet, no whale, no seal, no anything like that. His eyeball is absolutely monstrosity size here. Look at this guy's head in behind it. You can compare that to that, okay? So way bigger than the big so-called biggest eyeball on Earth. There's another one that's also like the Tucalata beast here, where this sort of creature has a much bigger sort of eyeball. The teeth are completely none sort of whale. No whale has a sort of gigantic sort of beak like that, except a few sort of dolphin-like creatures and stuff, but obviously they don't get this sort of size, right? So come on, I mean, seriously, if you're going to tell me that this is a whale, I'm going to laugh at you. Okay, so anyways, so there, now I blew him up better. You can still see his eyeball and this sort of thing like this. Okay, look at his dragon-like scales. You can see them all perfectly. They're not sort of, it's a perfect because his skin is real dragony like, right? And this seems to be some kind of weird sort of fin-like maybe breathing apparatus he has here on the side. So maybe he actually can breathe underwater. Hard to know because I don't see any sort of here up in the front. I was looking for like some kind of breathing hole that he might possibly have, like up here, like nostrils, but I don't see any. Now, they could be sort of camouflaged in there, or maybe they were closed with maybe when he died or something, they ended up closing somehow, possibly. But whatever the case, you can still see inside parts of his eye is still intact there, and this sort of thing like this. So he's not rotted away enough here to start blaming it on whale blubber or some ridiculous thing, right? So anyways, this was a real sea monster in Newfoundland. You got to give it to the Newfs. I love the Newfies more than anything this planet. I mean, those guys are the nicest people on Earth. I just absolutely, my most favorite Newfie people I've ever met in my entire life are people from Newfoundland, New Brunswick, PI, these sort of places like that. Two excellent buddies here from New Brunswick, and the Newfies there. They got some of the greatest sort of stuff from what's that thing called, a Mumford or something? Oh my God, is that ever funny? It's a great way if you want free beer. You sort of, you gotta put like a Halloween, like any sort of a blanket over your head or anything, as long as you're not showing who you are. And you knock at the door, and then the custom is then they got to give you a few drinks, and then they chuck you out about an hour later. So you can keep doing this, and then after you've knocked on 50 people's doors there, you're going to be in a pretty good shape there. Sort of thing like that. So if you want to start that in your neighborhood, if you're dying for a beer, you got to give it to the Newfies. They create some great sort of stuff up in New Brunswick and stuff like that. And New Brunswick has some fascinating sort of monsters down there too. So everything from oh my goodness, there's the Lake Utopia monster, actually, which I'll cover another time, where even a carcass was found of them in it, and stuff like that. So, and this was a gigantic creature, way bigger than anything that should be in a lake, right? So very fascinating, just another sort of interesting one. But I guarantee you here, as well as my Tukalata buddy here, these two guys were not whales. Oh, this is another thing. There's this scientist that has this paper, and he says the Tukalata beast was this little sort of whale. And every time I forget the name, because there's so many kinds of smaller species of whales. But anyway, he claims that this is a species. He has it in his arms. He's holding the skull, okay? So this is the one that he's claiming is the creature. Now, if you believe that anybody could put their arms and stretch it across this monster here that you're seeing compared to this guy down here, and you believe that some guy could put that in his arms, the skeleton of this so-called one that he's claiming that it is, right? Okay, or that he be able to put this beast's arm in his arms, then yeah, you know what I mean, really. I mean, why does anybody believe these guys? They come up with the most fakest theories. I guarantee you it was not a whale. This is not a whale. Look, you can see perfectly here. This is a better one I brought this time. And you can actually see the same thing like that other Newfoundland beast where they have these perfect pores. You can see the dragon scales in each little sort of part all around the sort of thing like that. No whale on Earth has that, okay? Also down here you can clearly see these great big giant sort of larger scales. There was a picture of a Japanese man that had one in his hand. I mean, the thing was gigantic. It was huge. And sort of in his hand, just one of them. Right up here, you can see that white part. That's where they chopped off the horn. It had a 1-ton horn growing out of its head. Okay, and it battles with it. And in other drawings, they show the same creature on maps even attacking its ships. This identical one with the same horn coming exactly the same. They got them depicted identical to what this Tukalata beast, and also one that landed in the Gulf of Florence. Both of these were over 80 feet long. There's no sort of this whale that he claims it was that doesn't even grow half that length. So I mean, these are ridiculous sort of. There's people out there, they want to get their own little paper out, and they're not dealing with people that can actually take them on. And I guarantee you, this was not a whale. Okay, so anyways, the other one, there's I could see why some people might think that one of the ones I show and the other one is a Bayard's beak whale and stuff like that. But there's some things about it that isn't convincing enough to me one way or the other. So I will leave that one in the fence. But there's a few others that I show that definitely could not be sort of any known sort of ones of whales or any of that sort of stuff, and certainly are sort of unknown sort of creatures to science. And this certainly guy was one of them here, the mighty Tukalata monster. Look at the size of the eyeball on this creature. I mean, and you can see the sort of air holes there on the side here. This thing completely is different than any whale on Earth. He's got a giant tongue. This thing, I mean, absolutely ridiculous how anybody would claim this is a whale. Is the most silliest thing. I just mind-boggling. So anyways, now next, the Tombstone Epitaph mystery. One of the big mysteries is to where did the Tombstone Epitaph photo vanish? And do thunderbirds still fly the skies? Let us look at some modern accounts and even some interesting evidence showing possibly these birds still do, as well as the possible Tombstone epitaph photo, right? But anyways, me personally, I don't have a problem with sort of a gigantic bird. That birds of different species probably can get extremely outsized occasionally, because like I said, I saw a gigantic sort of blue heron that I believe had near around a 12-foot wingspan on it. And because, I mean, I had a flipping stick right in front of me. The guy was right in front of me. He was right directly to the center of my body. And I mean, this dude had the most unbelievably huge wings, and the height of him and the whole, he was just an absolute titan of monsters. I mean, the closest one I've ever seen to this one was not even half that size, barely. Like, I mean, this guy was just something from really, so and also, and when I was in Oklahoma, I saw this very extremely large bird, anywhere from bare minimum of like 8.5, 9 foot wingspan to more likely, I believe, a little over 10 to a maximum 11 foot wingspan on it. It's because I did the same kind of trick with a flipping stick, but I sort of, he was turned and I couldn't see his face that well. He certainly couldn't have been a sort of black vulture, although he looked very extremely similar like one. But he was very, very covered with fur. There was no sort of neck weird things like vultures have. So he seemed a bit more eagle-ish like to me. But I mean, I could only see him from behind when he flew away when these kids were shooting at him, right? So, but he was an absolute monster too. So I, and myself personally, and I've collected tons of stories from France and all over the world of giant eagles flying down and attacking people and flying off with kids and sort of stuff like this. So I sort of believe they can probably, under the right circumstances, carry more than what you'd imagine they could. Or that they're not really the eagles we know of, but maybe a different sort of species or two out there that is still evaded as like the Washington eagle and these sorts of things, where it's a giant sort of bird, but his claws are slightly different and maybe they can actually hold on to a human being better or these sorts of things, right? So it's hard to know this sort of stuff, but for sure, there has been in the past some gigantic sort of birds. But when I was a kid, they used the science said that no bird could barely fly over with a 15-foot wingspan sort of idea, right? Now they found some with 80, 90-foot wingspans they're claiming on them, right? And these sorts of stuff like this. So all these assumptions they made, when people first got on the train, they thought once they'd go over 20 miles an hour that everybody would die, right? So I mean, really, like, people listen to too much theorists, sort of things like this, and these things from everything from, oh, it couldn't be, they couldn't be alive because they died out 50 million years ago. Nobody really knows that. This is, again, theory, right? So here we'll look at the mighty sort of tombstone sort of epitaph one. Oh, it'll be a second here. We messed up on this one here, boy. I don't know what happened. Here it is here, but absolutely, I believe out of all these sort of pterosaur ones that I've seen so far that claim that they're all pictures of pterosaurs, this is the only one that sort of, something about it looks familiar, that I did see it somewhere in the past a long time ago. It's seems more natural to me. It fits the description of the tombstone, that it was spread across sort of the general store. In this picture, I don't have the whole thing, but it is some kind of a store-like sort of thing there. So everything sort of matches up with the description of sort of thing. And of course, in the paper, they over-exaggerated it a little bit. But definitely, there's some fascinating things. Look at the giant crest on him. And that's exactly what they show in these native thunderbird sort of reports and stuff like this. His bat wings are, this seems to be more natural. That is not some kind of cloth or, what do you call that, burlap sacks, or that wasn't made like that. I'll show you a fake one here in a second that I believe is fake anyway. But this one here is sort of, there's something about this one. I got it a bit too blown up here, so it's going to be hard to sort of really analyze this better, but it's sort of, if you look at a smaller one, I'll try and get a better one up and see if at the end I'll put it up and see if I can sort of make a better sort of one of them. And you can actually see sort of through the sort of skin a little bit, and the perfect sort of, it does seem to have the proper sort of more sort of the bone sort of structure going through it and stuff seems more proper and realistic, and the bends on the wings on it and all this sort of stuff. There's now ridiculously they had listed this as a stork. Right. So I don't think that's historic. So I think whoever put that, they just presumed it was historic and wrote that down. But anyways, that was definitely some, maybe what's responsible for these ancient thunderbird sightings of one of the sorts, right? And sort of stuff like that. Uh, but now here's what I believe fully a fake one. Now look, in my mind, what they did here is simply they put together some sort of either bones or tree leg sort of thing, right? You can see the spines don't, like the bone structure seems erratic and not exactly, like it's not even the same width from that one to that one. Sort of thing, and a lot of different stuff about it. It's too sort of perfect. Everybody's got the sort of like, so I'm completely convinced this is not an authentic sort of one, and it certainly wasn't the Tombstone sort of a photograph. But that's the difference. If you look at the other one compared to this one is very easily to see it's fake. The other one, I wish I could prove its origin. If I could find out where this was first published and what sort of a Fortune magazine. I was a huge fan as a kid of Charles Ford and these like that sort of different ones, right? So I read a lot of these sort of ones too. And it's very possible that that's where I seen it or something like that, like some weird one there. I was very well read, like I said. I read lots of, I'd always look for mystery like things, right? So for some reason, all I know is it seems familiar to me, that photo. It matches the Tombstone description, and I mean, if it is in some older book or something like that, then I likely believe that that was the Tombstone photo. And sort of it matches everything, it fits with it right, and for some reason I doubt it's fake. Something about it just, if it's fake, it had to have been done in more now times. If it was taken back then, it's not fake. That was a real sort of animal there that they had nailed up on that sort of thing. So very fascinating. Anyway, so one of those sort of rare sort of proof-like things. I saw some other ones. There's an interesting film of this giant bird that some guy films. That you watch flying. It almost looks like a dragon. It's got some long tail on it. And that's absolutely fascinating. I doubt it's fake. Even people have analyzed it, and you can't find any sort of messing with any of the sort of stuff. It looks pretty sort of good. So that's an interesting one, because you can clearly tell this creature is absolutely gigantic. I mean, he's really big. I've seen like lots of big eagles up in the skies and stuff like that. I mean, this thing looks extraordinary, much bigger wingspan, much longer, sort of weird tail on it, and very strange. It's certainly would fit the more pterosaurian sort of weird sort of one out there. So it's another interesting film. Even Josh Gates here, he had gotten some glowing light ones there of the down chasing for out in Papua New Guinea, and that for the roping and that sort of thing. And he had actually got on film of one of them glowing, because they have luminescent properties on them, right? And I fully believe, I talked to this guy, and his grandfather had seen this sort of big monster that was bigger than his canoe fly over around some island called Karkar, right? So absolutely fascinating. I mean, this guy was so serious. I guarantee you that dude saw something. So anyway, I sort of believe in that one. I mean, there's been enough random films, and they're always the same. It makes perfect sense to me. It'd be some kind of a fascinating sort of bat-like big monster, right? And he flies around, and he eats fish, and you would have this glowing thing so that you'd be able to sort of spot them, because this creature is reported a lot to even be able to sniff really well. Sort of it digs up graves and does weird sort of things like that. And that I could almost believe such a thing to tell you. Like I know people always think these stories are every time mythical, sort of weird and stuff like this. But just as a for instance, just a few years ago, here's another one. If I told you that there was this legend of a bird that goes and attacks giant sort of rock walls and then eats rocks, would you believe that? Not likely. I mean, most people probably wouldn't after it. And it was always thought a myth and written by hundreds of folklorists over the years and these sorts of stuff and saying the fanciful natives, right? Well, the creature is true. And that's exactly what he does. He hammers his beak into solid, hard sort of granite-like sort of stone here and bashes into it till he can finally bust a little pebble loose, and then he sort of sucks on it somehow and flies away with it. It seems that he doesn't actually eat it. It seems that there's some kind of nutrient value in there of some sort that he requires or wants for some reason and does this. So now this bird is proven to science, right? so I mean, seriously, like there's a lot of things out there that are sort of like, I mean, there's even a Spider-Man lizard for crying out loud. I mean, the guy looks exactly like Spider-Man. He even does the same kind of pose, exactly like Spidey does. I mean, what would be the odds of that? So if something like that could exist really as any of these that, we make them more mysterious than what they are. They probably, a lot of these things actually exist, at least to a certain degree, right? But certainly thunderbirds have existed in the past. I'll show you here in a bit a giant feather. Oh, I'll talk about first my experience with a giant feather. Um, this lady that I knew, I was over at her sort of place, and uh, one day she kept telling me about that there was this sort of big sort of thing that would fly across sort of the windows, and she said that it was sort of, you'd always hear these pigeons squeaking and stuff like this. So I said, that's fascinating like this. So I kept looking out for this sort of thing and didn't see squat. And so I was gone, and when I got back, the she was out, and her kid was with her, and this gigantic sort of black sort of bird that had a wingspan bigger than the balcony. Okay, so she swears it was like probably at least like about a 10-foot wingspan on this thing. Okay, he was pitch black, and he looked something like a crow, except like much more gigantic. And it actually it had such big feet on it that when the crows and the pigeons, and once in a blue moon a seagull trying to land on these things, when they go to put their feet on it, they can't even get remotely around the whole bar of the thing. They're just on the sides of it. This creature had such big claws that it wrapped it around and was having trouble, she said, to sort of stabilize himself, and he started going quack, quack, like this, and he was eating the pigeons and stuff and attacking them. So this feather busted off, and I wanted to bring it to this to some kind of scientist thing to get this checked out. This feather was the size of a bucket. When this thing started screeching at her, she grabbed at her sort of broom and sort of like, because she was scared of it, and sort of like it freaked her out. So she went to sort of, was gonna see if she could shoo him away with the broom sort of thing. And somehow this thing, he squawked off, and a part of his feather sort of busted off. And it was one of his bottom wing sort of feathers, right? I guess from her description, it was probably like about on his right, no, it would be on his left wing at the bottom somewhere, right? One of the sort of bottom feathers on it. And this feather was so huge that there was a bucket outside, And this thing was 3/4 the height of the bucket, but yet this is just one of the small feathers that comes down at the point at the bottom of this sort of thing. And it was pitch cool black with the most wildest sheen on it, but it had a tinge, a little bit of at the edge, like this weird sort of bluish like color. So it reminded me something like a crow's, but I mean, this feather is way taller than a crow and sort of anything. Like, I mean, it's crazy, man. So I was totally fascinated by this. And then her and I, we were out at this sort of exhibition, and we saw this exhibit about all the big known sort of killer birds of North America sort of thing. And they had their feathers out there in this pile. And I mean, these things all look like minnows compared to what was in this bucket, right? So about less than a week later, I was sitting there on the couch, and I saw this great big dark shadow come past over the thing, and then all of a sudden the pigeons all started flying for their lives and taking off, sort of thing like this. But unlike when you sit there normally, when a group of pigeons come by, you see the shadow get darker, but you see spaces in it. This was cold, black, dark, big, like shadow, like huge. So I might have actually saw at least something of what this might have been, but I didn't see him when, by the time I got out to the balcony, this thing was gone wherever, which way he went, right? But I mean, it was absolutely fascinating. So I have had a few sort of odd sort of experiences over the years with very large birds, so maybe I would be better off chasing thunderbirds. I seem to have more luck than that, than some of the other ones. but nevertheless, that was interesting. But I'll show you a picture here of a giant sort of feather that still has never been identified, in the same thing. I mean, this feather was like this one. It's super huge. I also saw this native fellow that had one on his sort of reserve, and I lost this photo, but I found it years ago. And this native fellow, his grandfather had showed him this sort of giant feather, and he took pictures of it. And I mean, it's humongous. I mean, just absolutely gigantic, but it's not fossilized. It's a fresher sort of feather. So hundreds of years ago, this great sort of thunderbird was still flying around in our skies, right? So, I mean, that's sort of conclusive evidence to me in my mind that some birds can get much larger than what we probably think that they can, right? So they are sort of, there is some validity to these things, to at least to a certain degree, right? I also think that people overestimate the size probably quite often of them, and all kinds of things like that probably occur. But there has been fascinating cases from Alaska. There was a guy that's an expert pilot. He should know his own size of plane. I mean, a Cessna, they see other planes in the sky all the time. They can kind of estimate, I'd imagine, a little bit better somebody than somebody that's never been in a plane before. And there's been all kinds of pilots here that have seen like gigantic sort of birds the size of their sort of plane, right? Some of their small planes. And these sorts of things were the same kind of wingspan on them. From Alaska, Northwest Territories, different things like this where these sightings have been over the ages. I saw one in a canyon that you can tell is absolutely gigantic. I mean, this thing's humongous size, and he's flying in this. It was taken way back in the 1930s or something, right? So for sure, some large sort of unknown birds to science, and Washington eagle, I guarantee you, existed. Audubon was 100% right on every single other one. They called the lily species a fake. They finally proved that one was real, and he was 100% accurate about it. Obviously, he was accurate about the Washington eagle. How anybody could dispute this man's wonderful work and all the great stuff that he did, and every other single one's right, and yet you're going to call him a liar about that? I mean, come on. I mean, that's just silly. So there was a bird in the United States that even science has studied, and sort of not that massively long ago, that had at least about a 12-foot wingspan on it. So I suspect, like from stories from France and other countries, and that some of these birds maybe they do come from South America with the thunderstorms and the stuff. These natives could be fully right about some kinds of the species do that. But I also think that there is sort of huge cave and mountainous systems where occasionally these birds may run at a local prey, and once in a blue moon they get blown off a course from a storm or some weird thing happens and humans see them. But otherwise, they're in the most remotest sort of valleys and probably hunt mostly at night or weird stuff like that. Also, it would explain there's been a lot of times missing kids that have been found and dropped seemingly from the skies that was smashed, and found dead that have missed in national parks and stuff. This has happened quite a few times over the years of odd sort of events like that where mysteriously the kids found like way up on the top of a mountain peak and kind of smashed to bits and weird stuff, like as if something dragged them up, right? So Marlin, I remember this guy Marlin back in the 70s in Illinois got picked up by these two giant sort of birds that was flying around there. There was two of them in this tree, and they had probably about a 12-foot wingspan on them with some kind of ring around their neck. So it could have been what there is a species that's known like that, but they're not supposed to be around sort of here, right? So that's an interesting thing in itself. So, I mean, they could have been something like that. It's hard to know, but it's certainly gigantic sort of birds from time to time of different species can occur. And the same with sort of other species, right? So just like humans, just like anything else. So I suspect some of these things we see are actually true, that these people are not lying. But I mean, the perception of it's slightly different because we're thinking it's some other species, but it actually may actually be the same species, but freaks, where they're very, very large, like way bigger than what should be, right? And like I said, in fish and different things, this occurs, right? So it's just interesting, but... so anyways, we'll continue on next about yes, folks. I had forgotten to mention about with the lady there with the huge thunderbirdish, like sort of a black bird of some sort. I had kept this in this bucket, and she sort of didn't realize, or one of them there, I don't know, these ladies are always cleaning her out and doing different things, in the house. So anyways, this thing ended up getting chucked. So I've had very bad luck with this. A buddy of mine I was with back in the 70s, we were walking along, and I found this gigantic fly that was the most astonishing sized fly I have ever seen in my entire life. So being a little sort of Smithsonian-likey sort of kid here and already heavily into ichthyology and all kinds of things, right? As a young guy, I sort of... I knew right away there had to be something to this, so I get this, I collect this fly, and I go all the way back to my place and contact the Smithsonian Institution and start describing this to this guy. And so I added on this sort of, I laid it up onto the table like this, and my mother sort of comes by, and I'm still blabbing with this guy, blabbing on the phone and stuff, and I didn't want to hold it in my hand. And I have an excellent sort of, like when I'm looking at something, I can see it sort of after that in my head, sort of. So I started describing it, and this sort of thing. And she comes by, and all I hear is this scream, and then I see her with this towel thing in her hand, and she bolts past me, and then all of a sudden I hear a flush. She was so petrified of this giant monster fly that she's seen on the table and thought it was sort of alive, and she cried. But I'm telling you, this thing was absolutely like... okay, I've been bitten by horse flies and giant sort of all kinds of different flies. I ran across monster ones out in Quebec forest and different sorts of stuff where they're pretty huge. Some of them I can get, right, and they'll bite right into your head, and they're vicious, some of them. And these sort of thing, I have a picture of me swollen up where my face is like 5 times more swollen from the gazillion of these bites, right, from them and stuff like that, out on this fishing trip. And so friggin' they're a nasty sort of thing. But this dude, man, was like about, I forget, I had measured the thing, but it was somewhere at least like about near closer to like 3 inches in length going across with gigantic sort of wings, but it looked identical to any sort of housefly. I've still never seen anything like it. No, it wasn't a big June bug or any of those. I know these things, and I researched this then and tried to sort of find any sort of bug that sort of could match with this, right? And I still haven't to this date. It's another sort of weird mystery. I've had sort of bad luck with that. I finally did resolve the click bug mystery. Sort of it took ages, and maybe this fly-like thing is known by somebody, right? But it's not in most of the standard sort of things out there that I can find anything like it, right? So very interesting, whatever it was. But then the Smithsonian Institute guy said, oh my God, like this, and was sort of shaking his head on the other phone. Now I'm explaining he must think I'm crazy that here I'm telling him I'm going to send him this fly and how could we do this and make sure that they get it and all this kind of stuff. And, and here my mother flushes it down the toilet. so I haven't had the world's greatest luck with these sort of things a few times. So very interesting anyways, but this huge feather somehow got sort of misplaced here, but it was an absolutely titanic. I've never seen anything like it, so I still can't identify any sort of bird that would have such a giant sort of wing height like that, because this was one of those great big huge buckets. It's not a short thing. It's like really, really massively those big, tall sort of ones are, I forget how many gallons are in them, but they're very tall sort of ones. And this feather had been busted a little bit, so it must have been longer. And like I said, it was about 3/4 of the height of this sort of pail, right? And I mean, this is just the bottom feather of this creature of one of the parts of it. So, I mean, absolutely pretty astonishing, whatever it was, right? I would have loved to have seen it. I believe I saw its shadow. But again, this is a couple of times I've had bad luck with that sort of thing, too. I have had sightings, but a couple of times I missed it by a smidgen. And the Bigfoot one even more upsets me because I would love to see it right in front of my face to say, yes, I've been fighting for this creature all these decades. Yes, he really is out there. 100%. When I look at the Patterson film or that one from Russia, I know that there is some kind of wild sort of thing up, but it would be even better if you sort of had it right in your face, right? So, like, I mean, it's interesting anyways, but there was this, as I mentioned about the feather, there's here we'll look at this one here. This one's fascinating. Like, look at the size of this sort of thing. It reminds me a lot like a different color and that sort of thing. It's still never been, as far as I know, identified of what sort of feather it could possibly be. But I mean, it's not that massively old, right? So, like, I mean, very interesting anyways, sort of thing. So I'd forgotten to mention what happened to the feather there. This is the most upsetting show for me. I'm trying to stay in a sort of calm thing, but I mean, when I did the angels part, oh my goodness, that's not good. So I don't think even if I redone these 50 times, if they've gotten better a little bit, but I still break down too much. It's too sort of heartbreaking sort of a thing. So anyways, we'll continue on. One was in the Yichang area there, Yangtze River in China. I've always believed in this creature, and this is a smaller one actually. This is fascinating. Some people try to say it's garbage. This is ridiculous. The creature is moving. I mean, how anybody could even suggest this? You're not obviously watching the same film I am. Okay. It's not a snake. I can guarantee you that for many, many reasons. A, it has this weird sort of spike-like ridge up at one point of it there, which is fascinating. Its face has a more sort of a beak-like sort of thing to it than any of the typical snakes. Snakes usually have a sort of more rounded head. It's not round at all, and yes, he does swim like a snake, but he also swims like a giant eel. And this is a small sort of a smaller one here, but I would guess that he would be probably around 15 feet long or so from the people you can see off in the background and the sort of different things from it. So very interesting anyways, but he's just, I'd imagine this creature gets even way bigger, right? Like the full-grown adults and stuff like this sort of thing. So this is just another unknown species in the Yangtze River, whether he's the Yangtze dragon himself or another sort of giant eel monster that lives in there. The Yangtze River has humongous fish. There's other photos. There's a bass-like fish in there that still isn't known to science, that is shown beside a log, and these trees are gigantic, and this log is over 20 feet long, and this thing is beside it, and he looks like a sort of a gigantic largemouth bass kind of idea. That's what he reminds me of, and I would kill to hook this thing. That would be the battle of the century. Could you imagine a 20-foot bass that could sort of blow up on a surface lure? I think I'm going to be going for a swim. So the Yangtze River, sadly, with this damming and stuff, some of these monsters may be no more, and with the pollution and the things that we're having, but this is definitely, there's also another one in Lake Michigan that goes around a sort of thing that is finally an excellent film for me. I can guarantee you that is an Angola sort of monster of some sort. And this is true, that there probably is monster eels in Lake Michigan, because this is the most conclusive evidence I've ever seen. This was filmed in a giant storm. They weren't looking for a monster. They weren't anything. Huge storm smashing this big bridge, this sort of pier-like thing out to pieces. And this gigantic eel sort of creature is there. It's not garbage. It's not anything. You even see its tail flap at the end. I mean, any person stating otherwise, claiming it's this and that, and you can actually see that it goes across about a span of about several of these triangle-like things that are out there, proving the size of this is absolutely gigantic. And he's a monster. And I mean, way bigger than any known sort of Angola or anything like that. So this could be, this unique eel theory is actually true. And like I said, I battled with something on my line for over 3 hours that I believe was a giant sort of eel. By the way, fought with the gazillions that I reeled in. I went way back in the day. I used to fish for them pretty well, several nights a week at least. And I loved fishing for them. They were lots of fun. And you'd fish for them in big sturgeon and catfish and this sorts of thing. And some evenings you'd get like 10, 15 of these things sometimes, and I hunted for them in lots of bodies of water all over the place when I was young, and I covered techniques and weird stuff. I noticed a lot of them would even burrow right in the sort of mud and stuff like this. So I'd chuck down blobs of worms in different spots along the bottom and just let them wiggle around in there, and then sort of use these spots after, and bingo, chumming sort of idea. But if you put them in big blobs like this, they would feel the vibrations of them down around in the muck that they're buried in, and then they'd come up and start looking for them and stuff. So for sure giant eels exist, and this to me is something like that, where he's sort of maybe not the typical dragon of the river as well, but it could be. It could be a smaller sort of a young one, right? So it's hard to know. But anyways, definitely this is not a sort of a known sort of anything that should be in this sort of a Yangtze River, right? So sort of the Mekong, but the sort of, it's absolutely fascinating sort of a creature here, and this thing is going up against very strong current. You can clearly see it's quite sort of interesting. It's made very well for the water, this beast. His nose is, like I said, too sort of long and thin here. You can see a part of it sort of thing. It shouldn't, sort of a snake or anything wouldn't have that. Also, the snake would be much more rounded in these areas. I mean, I've seen 10 zillion pythons on film. I held one of the largest ever in captivity here. It was in our Ottawa exhibition. It was 20-some feet long. I forget exact length what it was, 23 and a half or 25 and a half or whatever, something like that. And I actually hugged this thing and put my arms right around her head there, and I was petting it. So I mean, the trainer was a young lady that was there, and she didn't like this. She got a bit mad at me for doing that, but sort of thing. But I just love animals so much, and I figured, what's the chances of me ever being able to hold something like that right again? So, anyways, I went for it, right? So I'm not a monster big snake guy of any sort, but I would certainly love to chase, like I said, that dragon snake in Jamaica. I 100% believe he exists as well, right? So, but I'm a very serious guy when it comes to these cryptids. I just don't believe in them all and stuff like this. I do massive research since a kid, and there's certain ones that have constantly the same sort of thing. And this Mekong River in China, and some of these other ones are very, very credible, sort of some of the Russian ones too, especially Lake Lebinker. I guarantee you there's some kind of strange sort of creature in there, right? So there is ones out there that are sort of, for sure, there is some sort of way better evidence than the Loch Ness Monster or any of these other ones, right? Sort of thing. Now, here's my buddy. This is in Brunei. Now, a lot of people would think that this is some kind of ridiculous monster movie. It's not. It was filmed by a couple of guys in a canoe and that sort of thing. And this creature was going up the Brunei River. And the locals there call them it's their nickname for him, like whatever would be translation, like a water a naga. They call them something naga, so dragon, right? So naga is a word for dragon for thousands of years, right? So I'm going to tell you that I can almost bet anything on this planet, even though I think this is the most ridiculous but also cutest, weirdest monster I've ever seen. I would almost bet anything on this planet that he's real and that he's some kind of ancient sort of lost throwback from, and with some of the most fascinating adaptations I have ever seen of a creature. And I guarantee you almost the highest likely, I mean, because in order to fake this, this film isn't been seen by very many people, and so it's not that big of a thing anyways. There's nobody making advertisement money off of it or anything like this or any of this sort of stuff. And in order for you to create something like this, you would have to have some kind of robot monster here, and that's like about 15, 20 feet long, possibly in this sort of range, and with all kinds of wild sort of sensors in it to make them do all kinds of interesting things. No, this isn't a wave, so anybody that says you're seeing a wave or it's a crocodile, it's not. Okay, so we're going to go through this, and I'll show you why the difference between just watching something, and if you cut down the frames, people are too lazy. They just, it's a fraud, it's a fake, like this. I take these things apart and analyze them very carefully before I'm just going to make some kind of judgment on it, right? And this sort of thing. So here's some of the fascinating things. Now, look at these two protuberances here that come out of his nose, okay? And look at his eye position now. You can see it's almost like a triangle there. There's this little sort of V groove, okay? And his eye's very wide there. And you can, now, if you look at these could be some kind of air breathing adaptation, like a lung-like thing. It could be some kind of sensors it uses. Yes, fascinating sort of teeth here, but look at this strange lips. He's got lips like a friggin' carp slash some kind of weird pig-like monster. So, I mean, this guy is fascinating. So, now here's the thing. You can clearly see here's a part of his sort of body here, and he's making quite the disturbance. So you put that up against the canoe. So we can see that he's a fairly decent size here. Sort of like, what's great about him is I mean, if you were going to try and trap a water monster, you might have a shot with something like this, because he seems to me in the range of sort of like an alligator-ish leg size, where maybe if we got lucky here and saw a medium-sized one, or maybe he's an old one, or he could be a young one, but let's say we got lucky and we found an older one or a medium one, well, maybe this is similar to what their larger size would be. And this would be something you could possibly have a proper netting system where you could have a trigger-like thing when the monster's up on the surface. You got it hidden underneath with rocks or some kind of triggering contraption, and then lift it up out of the water and scoop this dude, right? And it would be possible that you might be able to get him with a very, very sort of good sort of thing like that. This creature, because he seems to, at least occasionally, he seems to be an air breather also. He may be able to do both, though. So it's hard to know, but absolutely we'll go through this and you'll see why I believe this to be real, sort of not likely could be a fake sort of thing. Okay, now looking in this position here, did you notice in the first one, those protuberances are gone, okay? So if it was some guy dragging a sort of rubber monster here right away, that wouldn't be occurring. Okay, so you see, and also you see that the eye is closing here and very different on this sort of thing. So this is now robotic stuff we're talking about. And look at this sort of big wave that it's making. You can see way off in the distance there, way further back, that there's water being disturbed there. So it's very hard to know how big the creature actually, because maybe like a third of them could be under the water that we're not seeing, sort of thing, right? So here he is here. Now look, it's not a triangle anymore on his eye. It's more different a shape. There's no way nobody, and this on the side of his gills now have changed, or whatever these things are. You can see clearly that they've changed position and are doing different sort of things. They're alive, they're moving, they're doing sort of like, there's some kind of weird sensor, maybe they knock out algae. I have no idea, like whatever weird thing that this thing is. I've never seen such a breathing, strange sort of sensor-like apparatus, but I suggest it's something like that. Maybe some a creature that can actually breathe air and also underwater somehow, or absorb it. Okay, so now you see that they change again on this side. Now look at his eye. It's perfectly flat. It's like a level table now. Okay, now his nose is sort of up like this, right? So, like, I mean, come on, seriously. That is absolutely fascinating. He's doing individual little micro things. That hump that was there is now gone, okay? Right? And his lips are fascinating. Look at them. They're the most weirdest looking sort of thing I've ever seen, right? Absolutely, he's such a magnificent sort of beast. And look at the scary looking teeth-like thing. But I wonder, okay, you see, like, this is the hardest part of this, is the front of this guy, because he keeps it so shut most of the time. You can see almost like there might be a slit there, so maybe this mouth does actually fully open up like a crocodile's, and for some reason he has this strange rubber section up in the front. Or is that really his mouth and it's smaller, and this side stuff here is some kind of maybe like filtering device that looks like teeth that could possibly grab sort of, I don't know, plankton or some kind of weird thing. Maybe he doesn't really eat, wouldn't attack you. Well, maybe he would, but even if he was a plankton. But I mean, whatever this thing is, he's very strange. He's hard to figure out exactly what his sort of, he's very different from any sort of creature I've ever sort of, he's not fitting into any of the perfect things, right? But he's definitely some kind of weird dragon-like monster. So yes, dragon-like things have existed, and this guy is probably one of them, right? Of this sort of thing. He might not be the responsibility of all the dragon sightings by any means, but he certainly is called a dragon, and he certainly is some kind of waterish, dragon-y like sort of monster, right? So here you can see now they fold. See on this one? They're actually folding down, so he's bending them himself, and now he opens up his nose there, right? Now, see, on those ones are closed. On this one, you can see his eyeballs even change on this sort of thing, and you can see that. So, I mean, you know, but if somebody's not watching these things, and if they see it, it's just a blurry film, they're going, fake, it's a log, it's this and that. It's not. This is, and absolutely, this creature, I mean, for somebody to do all this, and it's a cheap, low-budget camera and everything, I mean, come on, seriously. Like, so I'm a huge fan of this sort of one, and certainly all my life I've been looking to always sort of, at the Ogopogo thing, I saw but not cleared up his head. head to sort of make 100% sure of what this sort of beast might actually be, but he certainly seemed odd because I think that he didn't seem to be swimming side to side like an eel. It was sort of more weird. So, and also he was going up against the wind and sort of like creating a decent chop on him. And his head was out of the water just a little bit, but it looked sort of more eelish like his head, sort of to a degree, but a longer sort of facial sort of thing to him a little bit. So very interesting, and he was pitch dark sort of thing like this. So I know personally that there is animals in our water systems that are weird that are not sort of known by science yet, or in this sort of thing. Maybe the Ogopogo is some kind of giant eel, like sort of a eunuch eel. It could be maybe they deform a little bit as they get even bigger and bigger. And eels can live, it's suggested to possibly, some records suggest that there's been some found in wells over 300 years of age that the rings were counted on them. So, I mean, it's feasible that inside of a lake like this sort of a thing, that if they came from got in somehow and a long time ago, or they get in through some methodology that we're not aware of, underground caving systems or whatever it might be, that something like that could be feasible, that could be an answer to that sort of thing. Or that it's some kind of other weird sort of thing like that, that's similar eelish like, but it may be some kind of, some other sort of thing, right? It's hard to know. I mean, but no matter what, I would say for sure, for myself personally, I believe in at least I can tell you, Ogopogo is not a sturgeon, he's not a shark, he's not any of these sorts of stuff, and neither is this dude. Right? So he's fascinating. Now here, there's a guy in the background, you can't see him that well, but I wanted to give you an idea so that you can sort of base, like, you can see that guy's body there, and so it gives you a pretty good idea that this creature's a pretty decent size here, because that's just a little part of his head there, yet he's way wider than that sort of person, like, I mean, just his head part. So I'd say this creature's like a fairly reasonable size to him, sort of thing, but he's not like super gigantic. Like there was one in another a river in Thailand that was, you see it come out of the water, and this thing looks like it's at least like about 70, 80 feet long. And there's a couple other ones that were very interesting, that are in the highest probability that there is some weird sort of creatures still out in our waters that we haven't discovered, right? So here's my buddy close up here. You can see now his eye has changed again. It's more rounded and sort of stuff like this, and his gill little pattern changed a little bit there too. But this is the best clear photo of him. And he folded down those sort of sensors that he has. And you can see even inside, way deep inside, that there's even ridges in there and stuff like this. I mean, that would be a gigantic lot of trouble for somebody to go through all this for no money here. It's not on a monster film. It's not anything. So I'm a gigantic fan of it. I personally believe in the highest probability this film is real, and I would love to hunt this thing. I mean, I would love to catch this. I'd be terrified of him because he looks pretty creepy. But nevertheless, he's also an adorable sort of dragony monster that sort of really cheers me up when I'm looking at him, to think that poor ancient sort of monster here, he's still swimming out there, and with all our garbage and the stuff that we're chucking in our rivers, I'm glad he's at least still surviving. We better watch out, because if he mutates with the corona and stuff like this, he might get like 10,000 feet long and start eating us like Godzilla did to Japan. But isn't he fascinating? Eh? So he's a very interesting sort of creature, and definitely, like I said, I'm a huge sort of skeptic about most of these sorts of things, and I find the faults in many of them and sort of thing like this. But occasionally there's some of these that are extremely convincing. You can even see like little sort of nodule ripples inside of his nose and all this. Come on, I mean, really, like, this is too sort of advanced here for some couple of guys to make up a fake film for an afternoon or something. So I'm a big fan of it. So anyways, so we'll continue on next, and we'll go. Uh, this is from the author there of these books that were supposed to be put out with my decades of sort of cryptozoological and angling sort of research and around the clock, a lot of my information and things like that. And the most wonderful sort of human being you could ever sort of meet, sadly, because of this corona thing, was gonna was trying to get over here recently, and they shut the border again, and she had to have some medical attention, and she had been sick on and off a little bit, and so she's passed on, so we weren't able to sort of get several of the books sort of finished yet. That I had contributed some information to a few of them, and so it's very heartbreaking. This lady was the most wonderful, sort of decent human being you could ever meet. So I guarantee you there's angels, because she was the most angel of them all. But this corona is a deadly cause. I mean, it's absolutely terrible. Uh, but anyways, we'll sort of look here at some angels and things like this. So we're trying to now find we might have found some another sort of editor that'll be able to sort of continue on where she was left off, and she really loves sort of animals and things like this. And two of her stories in the book, and I guarantee you this lady's seen these things. She was the most decent, sort of honest, Christian-y sort of human being you can sort of find, and so like and she took care of. She was like she helped out so many children and so many different things. I mean, this lady had a magnificent career over a lifetime, and these sort of things, and. It's you know, this corona stopped all this from happening and getting together, and all these sorts of things, and just destroyed the family, and I'm just totally devastated by this sort of thing. And so this is the first time I've even been able to talk this long with us sort of myself. So I mean, every person that knew this lady, she was absolutely wonderful. So anyways, we'll have them out of somehow in the near future, and I'll give you sort of updates from. But they're illustrated by Dar there, or there's a few others I think that I might use that I'm going to send to them, that they can sort of use for those sections of it. And this guy, he'll put it together sort of properly and that sort of thing like that, right? I just contributed lots of sort of information, and sort of, but so it's written sort of like a lot about sort of the things that I did across sort of North America, and sort of on these sorts of subjects and things like this. But you know, and adding all kinds of mysterious things. I give you the best sort of lists of sort of evidence out there for these kinds of things. You'll get many stories that have never been published, and all kinds of fascinating sort of things, right? So she's in the two of the books because she saw two mysterious sort of animals that aren't supposed to be around. But I guarantee you she really did. So, I mean, she was the most wonderful, decent human being, and extremely honest, and I loved her stories and these sort of stuff like this. So I can guarantee you these things, that this lady really did see a sort of a lake monster in Lake Memphremagog, and she really did see like a black panther / cougar also in Vermont, and I'll cover that, and he'll put it down and sort of get the story out there for you, right? So anyways, they'll be updated soon. We're originally, there's already a cover was made a long time ago But we haven't, for this one now, we decided to break it in two parts with sort of lake monsters and the other one about land and avian cryptids, right? Because it's sort of tons of my research and the other people sort of, they're also like historians sort of inclined and sort of, so it's, a tabulation of many, many interviews, many sorts of things, and a completely different way of looking at it because in this case, you have a person with well over 100 and some plus, like more towards 150,000 sort of range or more hours out in the water. And seeing every kind of wave you could humanly imagine and all kinds of weird stuff and doing all kinds of experiments through many decades and angling experiments all over and looking for these sort of proof or non-proof lake monsters and different ones reported, right? And so I'm the only sort of person that ever sort of did this sort of thing, and I started this in the 60s, so so a long time I've been doing it. This was the plan sort of thing like this, so it's a different viewpoints and many things, and you'll find a lot of sort of information and interesting old historical records and accounts and lake monsters that aren't listed in the sort of normal sort of these cryptid books. So, including some pretty weird ones. Actually, one we have a local one that is contributed about. I have several stories, one from my favorite witness of all time, Old George, who was always a fascinating plethora of information of the strange and the weird. This guy had more strange things happen to him, but I actually have been able to verify some of the things he said, and they're actually true. So far the guy has got no scores against him, and I can and the things that he says match up exactly with sort of you know what I mean, what's out there. And so we'll discuss even the most hilarious sort of thing that'll be in that sort of secondary book about an interview with Old George of what Sasquatch really is and how where he saw a Sasquatch. And this is fascinating because it's almost kind of what I believe, but in a different sense than what he put it out, but to a certain degree. So it's the most sort of hilarious sort of interesting sort of thing. I can tell you one thing about the mighty Mr. Old George is that this fellow, everything somehow, these creatures and Martians and everybody, they all wanted to come by and say hi to Big George, right? So, anyways, he was a magnificent sort of human being. I just absolutely loved his stories, his acts, and everything about this guy. I like sort of people from Europe and these different countries. They always got these magnificent sort of tales. I mean, I heard one from one about a werewolf and things like this, and I researched through this area, and actually there was this werewolf sort of skeleton head found that is absolutely terrifying, and is certainly no normal wolf, and the size of it is just absolutely atrocious. And even actually, I think there's been a few sort of people that have sort of tried to hunt this story down, but this guy actually put this sort of werewolf thing inside this box with chains and all this weird stuff, and they believe there that this is how you kill a werewolf so that he can't sort of come back and get you, yet the skeleton head's there. It is a giant wolf monster of some sort. So I mean, this guy was so petrified that he actually did this whole ritual and stuff ages ago, right? And sort of thing like that. So that's very fascinating sort of a thing that you know, something like that. So I'll cover that in the werewolf ones like that a bit, sort of a bit more about that sort of story like that. But I mean, this George, to all kinds of different ones there that has some of the most magnificent sort of tales. So there's a lot of great stuff in there, and that will cover up different sort of ones over time through the different sort of the several books, right? But I mean, the avian and land ones, actually, I got some much funnier sort of stories of even events of my own than not as much of the lake monster ones, because I mean, like I said, most of these I have explanations for and stuff. But I am though a witness of, and we'll talk about this sort of. I am a witness of the mugwump. So I guarantee you the mugwump exists, and I'm pretty sure I know who the mugwump is. He's actually two things that is mixed together in sort of legend on this. So we'll talk about that also in that book, and many gazillions of lakes, even weird ones that are, like I said, lots of them they're not sort of listed and things like that, where they have strange seal-like cryptids to other sort of weird sort of stuff. So a lot of unusual information you wouldn't find sort of in a very different viewpoint because of the massive amounts of hours out in the water, being a trophy fish specialist of multi-species all over North America and stuff like that, and studied all over the world since a child. It's a different sort of viewpoints on these things, and interesting information about sharks. Yes, do actually go into fresh water and can survive a lot longer than what they claim that they can. Many species. There'll be over 80 species that has been tabulated. That is sort of pretty good evidence that they can sort of do this. And all kinds of interesting information about all kinds of different things that you wouldn't find typically sort of viewpoints, right? But all I can say is that this lady again was the most wonderful sort of a decent angel ever in history, and the most. I hope the big angels in the sky, and she's standing right there and seeing them and all that sort of stuff. I hope she's enjoying herself, because certainly she escaped at a sort of a good time, at least, of the sort of the sadness. This corona, sure, we're in lockdowns now and all these kinds of things. I mean, it's terrible. It's sort of the most this evil sort of stuff is sort of really bad. And I mean, that the psychic there put in all these sort of predictions, and there's some really weird ones in there. Round and round it goes, when the mass stops, nobody knows, not even I or something, right? And all these weird sort of like interesting things that quite a few of them have already sadly sort of come to pass, but there's many massive ones sort of in there that are very interesting anyway. So we'll get that. That was supposed to be done sort of first, but sadly, and the sort of this, he wants to sort of focus on that sort of what I was contributing, because I got all the information there and all that kind of stuff like that. So they're just going to wait that one out a little sort of a bit, and sort of get this one first fixed up and sort of edited and done and stuff like that. So all the sort of people that contributed to this sort of stuff like this by over 5 decades, plus research on this sort of subject, and all kinds of interesting sort of ancient historical records to everything. You'll have an unusual, different sort of ride, and there's many sort of explanations that I'm going to cover. Many that nobody else has ever before, and sort of stuff like this. But I'll tell you why I believe these things and these kinds of stuff like this. And he'll show all of the sort of the different evidence I collected and the sort of stuff like this. He'll have some artwork mixed in it and some beautiful photos and things like that. So anyways, we'll do that. So, but let's go on here with about the sort of the fascinating world of sort of angels, and we're just doing this for sort of in honor sort of her, because she's sort of certainly, like I said, was about the most angel, sort of nice, decent human being with a heart of gold that you could humanly find. Even her enemies, after they were mean to her, she was still kind with them. So there you go. So here's this one. This was in 2006 in a Charlotte hospital there. This fascinating sort of figure, this young lady, poor Chelsea, she was taken off life support, and all of a sudden she started getting better. And the second this angel thing sort of appeared, so the staff couldn't believe this, and you could see it on the monitors. And it's very sort of like sort of the one in Israel there where it flies over the sort of mount, the temple there. It's similar in the sense that you can see the same kind of like glowing like sort of thing to it, right? So over 400 staff members, I believe, something like that, all actually went up and looked at this thing. They kept making them stop, like, and then they'd get rid of some, get more to go look at it, right? And so, I mean, and this girl miraculously started breathing on her own again, even though they'd taken off her life support, and she made it. No, I don't know if she made it for massive years after that, but whatever, this angel still wanted her to see her birthday anyways, and these kinds of things, right? So, I mean, that's absolutely extremely sort of convincing sort of one of us, if you're a skeptic, that the odds of the correlation of that instantly you take somebody off life support and all of a sudden this angel mystically appears that shouldn't be floating there. You can see wing-like sort of shape here of some sort because it's probably floating and stuff. And it says these angels can take forms like it could even be, you might be talking to one and you wouldn't even know it, right? So we'll go on the premise they actually exist, right? Well, then this would be very feasible that maybe to not scare the child or whatever reason, like some kind of thing, they decide to be smaller in some kinds of instances or stuff and just take a shape of something not as friendly, and as well to give some kind of sort of, I don't know, hope to the world that such mighty entities exist, and but not to show you fully exactly what they look like or something. Maybe we don't deserve to see them. I have no idea. Like whatever the case, for some reason this angel decided to sort of do this, right? So I mean, that's interesting because I mean, it's not something sort of like, it's not a fake thing. It was witnessed by all these sorts of people. It's very sort of, I mean, if 400 people said they saw Bugsy Magoo shoot somebody, you telling me this guy's going to get off for murder? No, right? So, like, I mean, you can't sort of just always give, like I said, the same thing, the skeptical thing, when there's no lighting effects or weird stuff that could cause such a sort of strange unknown thing like that. Also, the correlation that the child all of a sudden mysteriously comes back to life. I mean, these are sort of, you can correlate that in history, angels are known to sort of be able to do this, right? So then if you want to look at it that way, then at least they match up. So it's not like as if the angel went there and all of a sudden the kid, I don't know, turns into Godzilla or something, right? Like, I mean, it's that would be different than historical things that everybody else is saying, right? So then, yeah, the film might be then a question of some sort, right? But because it sort of even matches like what sort of the typical sort of things of what they describe them looking like, they always show the glowing halo and this sort of stuff, this would be feasible that this actually really is one, right? So very interesting anyways. I mean, you can't prove it one way or the other, obviously, but I would suggest that being a skeptical person, if I was going to even fathom the idea of angels, which I guarantee you they must exist, from the one over the Holy Mount, that's extremely convincing sort of thing. But and we'll cover that sort of next here. But I mean, it's a fascinating one, right? Like, I mean, you got to admit, very interesting. Now, but this one here, I interviewed this Muslim sort of family, and this one is the most fascinating of all. Look at the light that this creates and glows across the sky. There's literally, because tons of films you can find of different people that filmed this Muslim family all seen it. They were praying there in this mighty angel, and they said, oh, yeah, the angel. All of them 100% believe it's an angel, right? And over conveniently the same area, the same sort of like temple-like sort of spot, a angel in ancient times was said to do a similar like thing. You also even see it shoot some kind of warning beams, and they go flying down on the thing, and this thing vanishes way faster than any sort of ship or a drone or any other thing in this universe can sort of do. And the power source off of this is incredible. I mean, you can actually see the wings come out of its back. So this gets rid of these ridiculous scientific papers that I've read since I was a kid that it's impossible for an angel to fly, their wings would melt and this and that. What a bunch of low sort of IQ sort of people that sort of written these papers just to get their name out. But I mean, this is the real thing where it's an actual sort of, it is true. There's some kind of like fiery, like sort of entity with intelligence that sort of can actually change and morph their shape to, and so they do have the ability to make some kind of power like wings that come out of them, and when they need to fly away they can use them, or they sort of fold them back into their sort of body and just transforms back into it, because it's some kind of sort of power-like sort of source here. It's different than sort of like the human-like body, right? It's a sort of thing like that. So no matter what anybody says, I mean, over 10,000 witnesses that night, multitudes of films, everything. It's not explainable by any sort of, and one of the films I saw that is particularly interesting to me is that you see these sort of red, sort of weird flashing lights way off in other areas, and they look gigantic. So if the thing was a spaceship, let's say, right, it would have to be extremely huge. I mean, extremely so. So what if this is true, that these, angels are in some kind of chariot-like thing, so whatever we want to call, like a flying saucer-like sort of idea of some sort, and that at a certain, that maybe it's too far for angels to travel from wherever their sort of heavenly planet is, right, sort of thing. So, but what they do is they fly in these sort of chariots, and then he beams one down to sort of send you the message, and then the angel goes back up into the sort of chariot thing, right? So, I mean, that would sort of make sense, even if you do sort of want to look at it as alien-like technology or whatever. It doesn't matter. Some mighty being of some sort is floating right there in the skies, and he's sort of doing intelligent sort of things, right? So I would say out of all this sort of angel-like evidence in human existence, it's controversial whether there's a spaceship up there or that this mighty angel just flew from heaven or whatever. I mean, this doesn't matter to me. The point is I know they must exist because of something like this. It's too convincing. When I saw this Muslim family's face, I mean, I guarantee you these people saw this thing and they know that that's what they saw. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's not so, like, there's certain people you can sort of like just like right away sort of tell sort of like that this is true, and this sort of thing, the highest probability, and it matches up with these 10,000 other witnesses around, right? So I mean, I just totally, like, for me, I'm not going to question this at all. As far as I'm concerned, I have no idea really the massive like interpretation of exactly what an angel is, except that he's a sort of a helper of God, of this mighty God being, whoever mighty God being is, whatever translations are correct or whatever. I don't want to get into these sort of things. I just know that, or whether or not he really flies spaceships or any of these kinds of stuff, it doesn't really sort of matter at the end of the day. They exist. Right? Because that's sort of like, even if you're going to go by the ancient alien sort of thing, this matches exactly sort of that sort of thing, and it sort of fits in with all the rest. So whether you choose to call him a mighty god or not, or you just think there's some kind of advanced race, this has nothing to do with the fact of whether they're real or not, and so he is real. This thing came there and had intelligence. It had some kind of thing. So when you get these SETI guys and they're shooting out sonar beams into things, this is laughable. These ancient sort of angels to different sort of beings from the sky have been visiting us since we've ever been around, and sort of thing like that. And so that's just, I mean, how people still keep sort of denying this or debating it is fascinating to me. I mean, they exist. There's almost any sort of colonels to generals, so all kinds of people in their own sort of thing are admitting to you that they've seen sort of unknown sort of craft like weird things up in the skies and sort of stuff like this. There's lots of fake angel films I see out there. If you see anywhere the thing's got wings or a picture of its wings with where it's got feather-like wings, it's not real. Okay, none of these are real. This thing was real. Okay, and the previous one in the highest probability was an angel, because if you're going to go by the correlation that mysteriously an angel-like figure appears, mysteriously a billion to one shot that somebody going to come back from the dead here when they're taking off life support, it's not that good of odds for you, and sort of thing like that, and conveniently then mysteriously the young lady gets better and can breathe on her own. I mean, come on, really, like, it's more correlation that way because it matches ancient historic records. And this is what I'm saying. I'm an historian person, and you're looking at massive thousands of years of these people telling you there's some kind of angel-like being came. So it doesn't matter at the end of the day whether you're the Presbyterian minister or Catholic or any sort of one. Everybody's reading from this ancient manuscripts that have sort of reality to them. They're just sort of, everybody interprets them slightly different, but yes, guaranteed angels exist, whatever they may be. The rest of it is debatable, right? But all I know is that if you believe you came from an amoeba, you can continue to believe that, but I believe that there's much more to our universe than this. Way more sort of mysterious like things are going on here, and sort of that's what's occurring, right? Like, so there's much more proof. Like, I mean, there's literally like hundreds of decent films you can find now of like flying saucers where they weren't CGI. Some of them are even from NASA or weird stuff, right? And they're sort of extremely fascinating. Some are really quite old that couldn't have been CGI and these sorts of things. So even if one existed, it should be enough to sort of like, at least if you can prove that it wasn't CGI and you can clearly see that this space vehicle is extremely huge, or whatever it may be, an angel or whatever. In this case, like in this thing, there's certain ones that you just can't sweep underneath the table, and this is one of them. This is the most amazing thing. I would have loved to have been standing there and seen this with my own eyes. I would think that was the most incredible thing in this universe. I mean, what kind of mighty sort of, wow, like, I mean, that's really sort of fascinating fascinating thing. So the mighty angels, I mean, and so since you can see one right there and sort of like that, it could be that these things are true, like they say, this Iblis guy with a giant mighty sword and all this sort of stuff. I mean, these things are, all these ancient people that told you these things, they were telling you the truth, that there is some kind of mighty beings from the sky that visit us. And so, like I said, the rest of it, I don't think at the end of the day, people that tend to sort of believe in some kind of spiritual like thing or some kind of ancient alien or whatever it is, you're all sort of looking for sort of that you sort of understand that there must be more to this world than just an amoeba, right? And that, or the Big Bang and this sort of stuff. It's way too intelligently designed. These guys can pitch you these things, but I mean, it's way more than that. There's stuff to it. There's some mighty sort of thought process here involved with all this sort of stuff. So I don't know how the ins and outs, I mean, nobody could know that, but I can tell you these many things. From, if you're going to look at it at face value thing, this heaven place, which I'm sure she's going to be standing there and enjoying it and that sort of thing, is that this heaven place seems to be like an Earth-like sort of atmosphere and place. It is not some floating joint in the clouds. He mentions that you can eat and drink of wine and do different sorts of things, right? Seemingly that they're building, and it says that this Jesus, right, he's gone to prepare a great place for us and stuff like this. Again, if his one day is 1,000 years of our Lord's, or sort of like 1,000 years of Lord, as you can imagine, maybe this could be sort of like this sort of thing where up there, whatever that they're doing and creating this sort of thing, that it's sort of what, and that it's possible that we're some kind of like a test of some sort that, this, it says that we were made in his own image, right? So if this is sort of like this, it could be that we were sort of kind of been monitored since we've been around, sort of like this, and only ones that behave in a sort of logical sort of fashion and decent that our fellow man isn't trying to rape and mug and kill and all the things that a lot of societies agree upon, whether they're religious or not, a sort of thing. The Ten Commandments in basic reality has a lot of common sense to it. Like, I mean, yeah, there's people are going to break some of these things, and yeah, there's all these sorts of stuff. But I mean, it's just a general sort of outline of how what you should be really doing, right? Because you're a mighty sort of intelligent being, and these you already know that by working in this sort of system, that this is the best for the people. They'll be the happiest. They'll be the best, sort of all that sort of thing, right? Just So I mean, there's a lot more intelligence to this sort of stuff. So, like I said, I can't really tell you all the origins of all these sort of things and whatever, but all I know is that some mighty beings in the sky exist, and this mighty guy must be in like the most extraordinarily sort of the leader of this that created all this, or however it works. That he's sort of this mighty God. He has sort of in-depth understanding, much more than sort of we do, and we have weaknesses that probably make people such like a great sort of leader like that in disgust and mad because we're doing sort of behaviors that probably, yeah, you know what I mean, would be considered sort of more simian-like, right? So, like, I mean, I could see that. Like, I could understand even myself that, I mean, if you were a highly intellectual sort of human being and you're not in it for money or all kinds of things, you have a sort of like a standard of some sort, right? Well, then, when you're looking upon what you created, and they're all sort of complaining and whining, and you tell them don't worship fallen idols, yet they're constantly doing it, and all these kinds of stuff, you can see why the guy would sort of, get peeved off, right? So, I mean, these things make perfect sort of sense, whether the guy's a supernatural being or whatever he is. I don't think really that, as long as you sort of understand that, yes, we must have more sort of to us than an amoeba, that's sort of probably, yeah, and try and be decent to your fellow man and this sort of stuff. I think these are the things that sort of like all people, because he says too, I remember another sort of passage that everybody sort of knows somehow he exists, right? Sort of idea that somehow he like, so even if some reverend guy thinks that the poor heathen, yes, the poor heathen has a much less chance of maybe possibly getting to the sort of gates, sort of idea, but it's seemingly that even if the guy's in the deepest jungle or whatever it is, that some kind of like a god-like story exists there. They're just translations and their interpretations are different. But maybe God actually does this. Like maybe every sort of area, he talks to the people in a sort of way that he knows that they can handle. And what he's really testing is will you follow directions and sort of be decent and this sort of thing like that. It could be something like that. So it's just some thoughts, but you'll see a lot of stuff like that in that book there about the psychic and that sort of thing, where there's a lot of unusual sort of things out there that sort of make you wonder that there might be a lot more to our universe and everything else than what we could ever sort of possibly imagine. Because, I mean, the correlation of the oddness and weirdness of how these things occurred to these different people and all these sort of stuff certainly highly sort of makes you wonder that sort of there's more to it out there, right? So, here's another one that was in Jakarta in 2011. I find this one sort of interesting. You actually see this sort of unusual figure materialize also in the center of it, and it's similar like the sort of color and sort of thing of what you see on the one over the Holy Temple Mount. But this one I'm a bit suspect of. I don't know. It's sort of, but whatever the case, it's interesting. Anyways, it could be a possible real one. Why this angel flew down so fast and then zaps away like that is kind of weird. But I mean, there could have been some reason. Maybe it was stopping something from happening or something, or got off course, or I have no idea. Like, but whatever. Very interesting. Anyways, but the reason I'm suspect of it is you see a sort of a dark sort of thing like that. I doubt that the angels sort of would sort of like, I mean, if you're already in this all pure sort of color like this, I don't see why you'd need this sort of section to be popping out, right? Like, so, like, and even in the films there, nobody sort of witnessed anything like that, like a dark humanoid figure inside the glowing sort of Israel sort of angel, right? So that's, you don't see it on film, anything sort of like that. So to me, so this one's suspect, but I mean, it could be a real one. Yeah, but I still find it interesting enough that at least it's worth commenting on, right? So. But now this one I love. I had to include this one. Here, this is great stuff. You got this Christian rock group here. They were in Iowa or something and had this sort of Christian revival rock sort of thing going on, and Yahoo, Scooby-Doo, and all this sort of stuff going on. But this guy was taking pictures in this fascinating angel-like sort of thing. But you see, it matches very much, and you can even see sort of like a weird heatish-like signature coming all around it and stuff like that. Absolutely fascinating. So I don't know what to think of that, but I mean, if it hasn't been CGI sort of thing like that, what's interesting though is there was seemingly some people that had seen something or whatever, right? So there's a little bit to it at least that sort of corroborates with it, possibly, that this angel really was there, but not enough info that I can tell you one way or the other. But I still like it anyways. I like the idea of this rocking on angel there, and he or she's going down and sort of stuff like this. Oh, and that's another thing I wanted. There's a couple of interesting things also about angels that we tend to sort of think that females were created for us as some kind of amusement, almost like as a secondary thought. But this is not the case, and I'll tell you why this. And that also that probably female sort of angels exist, okay? There's mentions of these cherubs, and they sort of use this as a word of female, okay? And they were supposed to be guarding even this Ark of the Covenant and this sort of thing like that. And they seem angelic-like, so I sort of suspect that because in ancient times it was always the guy's the ruler, he's got the four wives, he's got all this sort of stuff going on, he's the boss, blah, 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 blah. Well, then the rest of them, when they talk about this, even in biblical sort of stuff, this was read for the intelligent sort of man at the time to be sort of reading this, right? And all this sort of thing. It was designed sort of like that because it makes logical sense, again, that if in those times the sort of guy is sort of leading this sort of stuff in most of it, and in those ancient times, I'm sure there was always exceptions since near day one, probably. I mean, Eve even got Adam quite easily to start eating the tree of sort of knowledge, right? So, like, I mean, that's sort of so. But the thing is that cherubs seem to be sort of like, they don't mention when they were first sort of created, right? And he says that he made the angels first and this sort of stuff like this. So I would suggest that also cherubs existed at the same sort of time like this. So I think that personally, I believe that a male and female sort of version, like God seems to be for sure seemingly a man, because he says he makes in his own image, and so Jesus is born. And this sort of thing, it more would correlate 100%, and then also the way they use the terminology, it always means man. So I would highly suggest in the highest probability that it is a guy, right? But as far as to state that there wasn't a sort of other women version of these different things, this is now up to interpretation and sort of like this. And I sort of suspect that always there's been a female made with a male, not that the male was sort of the sort of thing that's just common sense. It's a mating sort of a thing and company and all that sort of stuff like that, right? Like how you would sort of procreate like any sort of creatures and stuff. You make a male. So, like, I mean, that's sort of, I could see that very likely that also female like angels of some sort exist out there of some kind of thing. And I mean, there's other sort of weird mentions of stuff. So who knows? There could be other entities that was not mentioned in the Bible that God may control of some sort out there that we don't know about, right? That I mean, so a book can only cover so much, and even all the side books that were removed from it only can cover so much. So there's way more to the story. But I can tell you this much, that so far that any of the sort of biblical things when it comes to cities or a guy did this and that, there was a guy that even he had there was a mention about this gold in one part of the Bible, some kind of weird treasure like thing. I forget what passage it said, but a guy ages ago actually took this in a more modern sort of view and said, hey, that's interesting. I wonder if anybody searched for this and actually found this. I mean, that's fascinating, right? So, like, I mean, there's massive amounts of very intricate sort of things in the Bible that end up being sort of factual, that you find this sort of city and stuff like that. So no matter what their interpretation of what God really is or any of that stuff, whether that's sort of, that's a different sort of subject. It's the bottom line is that some sort of mighty beings out there must exist, and that they sort of do and have influenced our earth since time began, is a much more feasibility than, you know what I mean, the Big Bang, and then, Bigfoot sort of flew in a meteorite, and one of his amoeba sort of, flew out off of his hair, and sort of then landed on the earth, and we all sort of started turning into, like, I mean, these things are sort of, none of this stuff is provable of any sort. And again, but on this side of it, you have thousands and thousands of years since time began, and gazillions of written literature from people's private diaries to all kinds of things about mentioning that they've seen some kind of angel in the sky, or some kind of mighty entity has come down and visited and this sort of stuff. And that there's been a gazillion films by now and all kinds of stuff of sort of strange things in the sky, and massive witnesses of this, from army to generals to every kind of Air Force, Navy, it doesn't matter who it is, everybody's seen these things, and high up sorts of people. There is something in our skies. And so as far as, like I said, the SETI stuff goes, or any of this, these mighty beings have been here since day one. It's a waste of time, these sorts of things like this. They have much sort of a zillion times more sort of higher technology, and people just don't like this because they want to believe that we sort of did everything on our own and that we had no help and all that sort of stuff like this. But this is not the case. So, like, whether I can tell you this rocket angel lady, or it looks more like a lady, sort of with the sort of, looks like she has a gown or something. I mean, it could be another thing too. It could be possibly some kind of ghost, even of some sort, some kind of material like thing like that, that's sort of angel-like. But whatever the case, I don't really know with this one. But anyways, it's cute. Anyways, I like the idea of that, a rocking angel. But anyways, next we'll talk about the butterfly people. Now, back in Joplin, Missouri, there in 217, and even ages ago, when I was in Oklahoma, there was some pretty wild stuff that has went on there. They had like big tornadoes that we had just missed and stuff like this. And there was a story about some kid that was sort of found sitting up in this tree. And then I found other ones like this, and a similar sort of thing. Another one in Oklahoma where this little baby actually flew like something like about a half a mile away, sort of landed perfectly in this tree branch V with no 1/1000th of a scratch on it, and seemingly was being held there until the people got up and reached and was able to grab the kid. When they all ran for their lives, the child got stuck in there. The tornado ripped the place to a zillion pieces, and it was all down the streets all over and stuff like that, so the house was destroyed. Child completely gone, and then half a mile later they find her up inside of this tree branch, right? And this has occurred many, many times over through history, including some ancient sort of tales of weird sort of stuff like that, right? So that's fascinating. Where if anybody sort of believes that that would be feasible, that I've been right in very close. I was almost destroyed by a tornado. It came right at the house, and right at the last second it veered for some odd reason. I tried to figure out if it was a land terrain like thing, but I mean it was pretty flat there and even, so I don't see why it did that, except that I was praying like crazy and every other person in there. This sort of thing, but I mean it was astonishing. It was so powerful that it was shooting reeds and stuff, little pieces of straw like sort of material right through telephone posts, like parts of them, like going across into it. I mean, that's how powerful this thing was. So I mean, it was insane, right? So I know that it's not possible that a child could be picked up and flung around like this. I also am very suspect of the raining frogs being tornadoes, when quite often there's multitudes of weird sort of like where they're all exactly the same size and sort of species and stuff like this. I mean, that's extremely weird. Why wouldn't it pick up like a minnow that was beside it around the same weight and sort of like, I mean, there'd be sort of, you would get other things here mixed in with it. Why is it only sort of that, right? But what if the mighty being God doesn't want has a plan still until this earth is sort of destroyed with this great big battle at the end that'll happen at this mount that where this angel was, right? It'll be around this sort of area right there somewhere. Uh, that sort of what if that he sort of repopulates possibly occasionally for some reason frogs or different sorts of things where they may sort of sort of drop something down to sort of repopulate it. Maybe it's needed for some reason or some great knowledge that we don't understand, right, until the world sort of ends. So because this has happened even in ancient times, since so what if that sort of like you got this mighty being sort of, and let's say it's all true that he created all these sorts of life forms. Well, then he sees in an area that I don't know, the scrub brush that this creature's gone and it's still needed there for some reason. Maybe somebody lets go extinct, but others sort of for some reason maybe they sort of cast a bunch of them across again, right? Because I find it very strange how quite often it's the exact same like sort of species and the same size and the same sort of thing. If it was just like a pond or stuff like that, you wouldn't sort of, when it would pick it up, it would have other materials mixed in with it that would be around the same weight and size category and these sorts of things. So I don't find that a feasible 100% good explanation. It could be to a certain degree, but I tend to think there's more to it, sort of. There's something other weird going on there. So whatever it is, I don't really know. It's hard to know, but I mean, it could be another feasibility that somehow we're sort of stalked from the skies occasionally. Like maybe these things, even when he casts it out, let's say, like, I don't know, it's some kind of minnow species that is needed to be sort of back in some sort of thing or something like that. Like a lot of rains of sardines have happened or weird stuff like this. So maybe they say, okay, we need 5 million more sort of sardines in this area, and you sort of drop this. Or maybe in ancient times, not all the animals were on this sort of planet, and he sort of shoots like sort of different things, right? I mean, there was even stories of reigns of cats and dogs. So, I mean, there's a lot of weird sort of stuff, meat, giant sort of iceberg chunks that have went through people's homes, and all kinds of weird stuff, which could be from planes probably and something like that. But I mean, there has been a lot that seemingly have a little bit more weirdness to them, where a tornado's not going to give me the answer or this sort of thing fully enough that I sort of could say for sure that that's the answer, right? So anyways, next show we're going to do about werewolves, ancient unicorns, more history of dragons and things like that, and a little bit more about sort of some other sort of weird sort of small lake monsters or cryptids, and the buru and ones like that, right? And so I know a lot of people don't believe, but and think that would be insane to believe that unicorns ever existed. But from ancient research all over the place, in caves to written on stones found in Africa, to all over the place, and these people are always getting the same identical creature. From my buddy in Mongolia who swore and said that he saw pictures of them and sort of stuff like this, and guarantees this man swore up and down he did not believe in the Yeti whatsoever, Allah, or any of that sort of stuff, because he lived right in the center of Mongolia. But he said that his sort of great grandmother and sort of stuff like this had actually had interactions with unicorns up until sort of like the earlier sort of 19 something, early 19 sort of hundreds here, maybe around the First World War sort of time, right? So this sort of they were still in Mongolia, and different sort of historians mention them. They had beautiful sort of blue eyes and sort of this darker sort of a weird sort of horn on them and stuff like that. And there's even a photograph that I put on one of the other shows where that's supposedly from there and sort of stuff like that. So this guy was so convinced that they exist. He said he saw photos of them that they had sort of taken way back then. I don't know if it's the same creature that I have on that other one. Could be, maybe because this was apparently a place that different people would visit to see this few unicorns that they still had left. So absolutely fascinating, and I'll cover about the mammoths that possibly, at least up into hundreds of years ago, they still existed, because these Queen's records are quite convincing. They have excellent sort of paintings of her riding around in them. It's pretty convincing that for sure that mastodon-like sort of a thing existed more up, and also hunters reports and some weird stuff. Again, the taiga forest over 2 million square sort of miles here. I mean, that's pretty gigantic of a forest, and especially it's not the sort of a U.S. science world here that's been combing the forests and stuff. The budget's there a lot lower. Way less people have ever visited a lot of these sorts of areas. But Russian scientists are fantastic. Some of the most genius people on earth. I love Russia. Sort of, it's a beautiful country. I'd love to sort of do some lake monster hunting in there, especially Lake Lebinker. It's terrifying, but this beast is sort of, he's a fascinating dude. Sort of thing, and historical records all the way back from the Mongols to, so making Loch Ness seemingly like sort of old news by this guy was reported way before. Right, so I mean, absolutely fascinating sort of other stuff that we'll cover in the next upcoming show. So and we'll give you any updates by that point, so stay tuned. Bye for now.